So hello and welcome to episode 7 of the barn door restoration. Last episode I covered stripping off the underseat area in the front end. So this episode is finished off the frame jig. Before we get into that, I should explain why I built the frame jig. So there's two major reasons. So the first is I'm going to be cutting this thing up. I'm going to be removing these parts. I'm going to be cutting metal out, restoring them, putting them back, and then welding them in. And I want to be able to put the frame in and out without having to measure it, square it and such. Just be able to throw it in, know it's straight, and know it's ready to go. So this allows me to do that. The second reason is these are very flimsy. Without all the supports, they will sag, lean against them, they twist. There's no way to ensure that as I built the body up, the frames will stay where they're supposed to be. It's very likely that they would twist and sag. So that's the reasons why I have it. Now, this frame jig is not built heavy for pulling on or anything. It's just meant for the frame to set in with no stresses on it. It is quite solid. There's not enough there to flex, but you couldn't pull on it with hydraulics or anything like that. So basically the first step in finishing this jig off was to check the work I did before. When I added the two main sections of the jig in with the body on, I discovered it was too difficult to try and get everything straight with the body. So that's why I decided at that point, stop building the frame jig, strip the frames off, and then give it a retry. So the first thing I did is check my work, and I did find that the front ones are off a little, so I just cut them off, got them in position, and re-welded them. I used the laser alignment system to make sure everything's straight. So the frame was very crooked. These frame rails were up and twisted. The back one left was down and in. The fronts were off. So I need to get it back in position. Also, these tubes for the engine cradle were bent down. A note on that, the transmission bolts in here to these two big bolts. Then the motor bolts on the transmission. So the whole motor, half transmission weight, are actually balanced on the ends of these pipes. So when you're banging over roads, they tend to sag. So they were both sagged down. So straightening was the most time-consuming part. One, it's quite flexible, so you can move it a long distance, it wouldn't stay, it would just spring back. Secondly, I couldn't actually hammer on it because I didn't want to put any marks in the metal. So normally when you straighten something, you put a strain on it and then you hammer on it and it would stay there. So lots of little taps seemed to work after a while. So these frames, the front frame, middle frame, and rear are all on they're on parallel planes. The top of the front frames is 100 millimeters above this one, and the top of the rear frames is 95 millimeters above. So getting that correct was a bit of an issue because they were all twisted. So that was the most difficult part. The widths all seemed to be fine. So once I got the frame straight, then it was a matter of just putting some plates on it where I wanted to have the uprights, and then just welding the uprights in. So these plates, a lot of them I use bolt holes, like this one uses a bumper bolt. This one here uses the bolts for the front beam. A quick note on that, the front beam on these, the later splits bolt on with 4 bolts on each side. On these barn doors, they have 2 bolts forward and then a strap with 3 bolts up. So I use one of those bolts up for this one. And then I use the front bumper bolt for that one. The middle one, it just lays on it. When I reassemble, I'll just clamp the frame rails to these. The frame has a joint here and it turns, and that's why there's this gap, so the rough weld that's there won't interfere with the jig. So the uprights are just a thin gauge square tube that I had left over from something, and I use 3-inch channel because they work well to lay across this old frame straightener with bolts that bolt down through. So now I'm left with a frame that's nice and straight, setting on the jig. I can now start cutting it up and restoring it. I'll no longer need the laser system, at least not until I start to put the body up. So my next step, I'm going to start on the rear frame. So cut the rails off, take this off the jig, and then remove any metal that needs to be replaced, and then media blast it. So it'll be nice to see some clean metal. So that's my next episode. If you want to see that, please subscribe so you don't miss it. So comments on the videos. The first 6 episodes were a week apart. It wasn't something I planned to sustain. So hopefully I'll have one every 2 to 3 weeks, but there could be gaps there. I hope I got the video and audio quality in a place where it's acceptable now. Some of the early videos were pretty rough. I was learning a lot. The format I have seems to be working for me. These videos are very secondary to the actual build. The build is the part I enjoy. So I had to come up with a format that wasn't going to take away from my build, wasn't going to use a lot of my time. So this seems to be working for me. Also, thanks for the comments. I do appreciate them. I don't respond to them unless they're direct questions usually, but I do appreciate the comments. Thank you. So anyway, I think that's about all I wanted to cover in this episode. Next episode, rear frame. Subscribe if you want to see that. Keep watching for some extra video I've added to the end. And thanks for watching.